a crisis is a crisis is a crisis. If you have let's say your widget factory cannot make widgets anymore, or your CFO absconds with your 401k fund, or aliens land on your building, mitigating those crises as a risk management issue, that is unique.
Welcome to the Leader's Mindset, where we bring you illuminating conversations from impactful leaders in business and our communities. Today, we're talking to Stephanie Craig, the founder of Kith. She's an expert in crisis management and enhancing reputations, as well as a military spouse. Welcome to the show, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for having me, Jason. I am thrilled to be talking to you.
Yeah, it's great that we're finally getting to do this. So, for everyone watching, hit like, comment, and share right now, so we can bring these game-changing ideas and insights to as many people as possible. And don't forget to subscribe. You're not going to want to miss any of our upcoming conversations with leaders like Stephanie. So let's start right with the basics. What is crisis management really about? Why is it the one skill leaders can't afford to ignore today?
Well, Jason, I think it's interesting. It is one of those things that you kind of know it when you see it. But everyone thinks they have an idea of what it is. But what we have really figured out in our expertise, as I've really delved into shaping the business into something that is very unique, is that crisis management is the skills that come together to mitigate, spot, recover, and then prepare for any kind of reputational crisis. But what I want people to really understand, especially the leaders that are listening, is that a crisis is a crisis is a crisis. If you have let's say your widget factory cannot make widgets anymore, or your CFO absconds with your 401k fund, or aliens land on your building, mitigating those crises as a risk management issue, that is unique. Each and every one of those have a reputational impact that has to be factored in. And so crisis management is very much responding to the crisis. But if we can talk to enough people about it, we also believe it is preparing for the crisis. This tends to be something that leaders flip. Even though it's in their best interest to prepare, they think it's cheaper to respond to a reputational crisis. And it really isn't. And for most organizations, if you have a public image, your reputation is between 25 and 45%. Most people are settling on 35%. A reputation is worth 35% of your organizational value. And to kind of put that into some context, if you are someone that makes something, how much is your factory worth to your overall value? And then factor that in, that of your 100%, 35% is that reputation. And something that we say is something that I learned at a former firm of mine that no longer exists, is that we own our brand. Our stakeholders own our reputation. You can buy a brand. You have to earn a reputation. And that's what you're protecting when you do crisis management. And it comes down to a lot of things, Jason. But the basic bottom line is that it is a crisis when you break a trust with your most important stakeholders. And to every organization, your stakeholders are different. They're different in who they are, what their characteristics are, what they value, and what they think of you. So everyone has different stakeholders, but a crisis bottom line is when you break trust with your most important stakeholders. And what we come in and we do is we tell people how to build the teams, which procedures they need to put in place, and what policies they need to put in place to, again, help spot, mitigate, and recover from these kind of trust-breaking crises.
So it sounds like that's kind of the secret sauce to what you're doing at Kith, and what sets you apart from other firms is you have these two major principles. Is one, let's start early, and two, a crisis is not about events, a crisis is about breaking trust.
Absolutely. And it's something that people don't think about, because responding to crisis is kind of sexy, you know, getting in there, taking charge when everything else is falling apart. It's kind of sexy. And for some of your folks that were TV watchers in the, early 2010s, there was a show called Scandal, and it had Kerry Washington, and she was doing all these wonderful things that looked really important and looked very tense, and that became the idea of crisis management. But at the end of the day, for smart organizations, crisis management is very boring. It is about practicing and seeing what your biggest threats are and really thinking about it. And I think for you and I have talked about this, is you do it in the military. You game out what could happen, and that prepares you for when it really does happen.
We do, and I definitely want to get into the idea of wargaming in the military a little bit. But what it reminds me most of, my very first assignment in the Air Force, I was working in a research lab on satellite propulsion, and we had a thruster experiment we were putting up on a satellite. And so we were going through all the training to be part of the space operations team to control and operate that satellite. And one of the things that the folks who'd been around for like 30 years, because this was in the 90s, so we'd only really been doing space for about 40 years in the Air Force. The people who'd been around since the very beginning of doing space in the Air Force, they were very adamant that we don't react to things. We have a plan, and we have multiple plans, and we do them. And they called it like Star Trek syndrome, because we all see on TV on Star Trek, they're cruising along, everything's fine, and something happens, and then heroically they respond to it. And what we don't want, because space assets are so expensive, and if you're lucky, you might get to talk to your satellite a total of 15 or 20 minutes a day.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes and does stuff all the time while you're not talking to it. And so, like, we don't want heroics. Like, heroics shouldn't be plan A. Like,
Right.
sometimes heroics have to happen. And I do remember there was one time doing that test, doing those operations, where we had something happen, and because we knew what the plan should be, even though we weren't ready to execute that plan at that time, we were able to go execute a different plan at that time, but we still had a plan. So it's I'm getting the impression here, when it comes to crisis management, we don't want heroics. We want thoughtful, thorough, detailed planning.
Absolutely. And we look at it in a really neat formula, which is clarity plus trust equals strategic speed. And this is something that for your folks that are veterans or currently serving will make a lot of sense, because the you'll hear a lot of people talk about crisis response. The differentiator is speed. Well, you can be speedy and not have a clue at what you're doing. So we think that the differentiator is strategic speed. And the strategic speed comes from clarity and trust. So clarity in your values, in your stakeholders, and what those stakeholders value as well. And then trust, and this will really hit home for your folks. Chain of command. Inherently knowing who needs to do what when, and who can make the decisions, because that is not something you should be thinking about when you're trying to figure out what your satellite's doing. And then procedures, like you said, your plan may not go according to plan, but your procedures, your procedures, and you know how to adapt them. And that brings us to our third thing in trust, which is policies. You have to have policies in place that ensure that your chain of command and your procedures work properly. And that applies to crisis response and crisis mitigation. If you have all of those decisions made in the moment, your people are going to know what to do. They're going to know what your values are, so you can you're not making decisions like, do I pay somebody or do I not pay someone? If your value is, I value my employees, and you can't pay them, for someone else says you can't pay them, you find a way to pay them. And these are really important key points of this that big organizations or small organizations can do. I work a lot with startups, and it's something they kind of forget to do. And it's like they wake up one day and they're under congressional investigation, or the SEC's after them, or there's some sort of thing. They're like, well, we didn't know any of this. If you are a small organization and you intend to grow, build your organization in a way that makes you crisis resilient. Live your values, know your stakeholders, build in the chain of command. Don't break down silos. That's a huge part of this. Siloing information. And if there's any management consultants in your midst, they're probably absolutely just cringing right now. Break down the silos, because limiting communications is critically important, it's a critical failure, quite frankly. Um, we do an exercise with some of our clients that we ask them to describe this. They'll be like, well, it's a pen. Well, it's a pen in America. In Britain, it's something else. I grew up in Canada, so this is a stylo in Quebec. And if you tell someone in Quebec to give you a pen, they'll look at you like crazy. But if you hold this up, they'll say, "Ooh, a stylo." But if you're trying to, in the moment of a crisis, say, "Hand me a pen," and your partner only understands stylo, that's a moment that you're not responding. It's a moment that you're not mitigating.
Well, I think you've convinced everybody that crisis management starts long before the crisis actually happens.
Absolutely.
So, what's the story behind your journey into crisis management? And what was the pivotal moment that made you found Kith?
Well, let's see. So the latest in the long line of people that run towards bullets. Mine are just proverbial. Let's put it that way. So my grandfather stormed Normandy, um, and managed to make it through all of World War II rather unscathed. My dad was a Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer. So I come from wanting to be in the middle of the storm quite naturally. I've always found that my happy place, the place that I am calmest, is when other people are losing their minds. And I just chose a much different path. I went into politics, and there are crises a day in politics. So I got a lot of chance to uh, hone my craft, we shall say. And so it's been a really neat ride. I might be the only person you've ever met that has worked in the Canadian House and Senate and the American House and Senate. And if you talk, there's one friend that I have. He's an executive vice president at a big tech company, and he once said to me, "I'll never hire anyone that doesn't have political experience." And I kind of looked at him, because we're all, those of us that come from politics, we're all a little, little quirky, I'll say. He said, but political people are problem solvers. And I thought back towards my career, and I remember I was just, absolutely fresh from college, didn't know a hoot of anything in the world. And I was on a campaign, and this woman, we were supposed to do a huge town hall for a candidate, and national media was coming, the whole thing. And we get word that this huge room that was supposed to be full of 300 seniors, 7 were showing up. And so she looked at me and she's like, "What event? This is a round table." And she grabbed what was supposed to be the podium table. She grabbed it. She grabbed some chairs, put them around, made people take the chairs away. She's like, "Oh no, the media advisory was wrong. It was a round table." And that was my first kind of seeing of people that in the moment of crisis, in the moment of like, oh man, we're going to fall on our faces on national media, she figured it out. And that was a really good lesson for me kind of in my political career. But the other part, I think, of politics, and this comes naturally. So It makes a lot of sense that I'm a military spouse, because when I grew up as a Mountie brat, similar to a Air Force brat, Army brat, kind of any of those brats, we moved a lot. And I think folks will understand that when you do that, you really become a student of people, and you become a student of figuring out where people fit, where people, what they value, how they operate. And the combination of my political background with that upbringing makes us very much uh, easy to work with, because for a lot of leaders who are um, in crisis response, they're having their worst professional day. And that doesn't require understanding how to manage a crisis. That is about managing people and trying to figure out how people tick. And I think that, you, Jason, as somebody that's moved a lot and integrated into different organizations, that's a key component of figuring out how to operate, is what makes people tick, how do they interact with each other. And so when we walk into a crisis, that is very much what we do. Um, but when it comes to the planning, it's honestly, we have to look like the doomsdayers, because people by nature don't like to think about what can go wrong. They don't want to think that, okay, this could break, somebody that I trust could break my trust. They don't want to think about those things. And we say, well, you have to. And we're finding that, as I think probably since the moment I joined Kith, we we've seen a shift in that managing and protecting a reputation is a fiduciary responsibility. And we're seeing that by it's in the C suite, but at the same time, it's also in the board. Your board members have a responsibility to protect a reputation, to be able to mitigate crisis when it happens. Like, it is really elevated quite a lot as a management principle. I think for a long time it was just crisis communications. Everyone thought, well, it's just crisis communications. We'll continue doing whatever we did that got us into the crisis back here, but you'll put out a press release and everything will be fine.
And to
And
be fair, 20 years ago that was okay.
mhm.
20 years ago that was how you did it, and most of the time it worked.
Well, yeah, except when it didn't. And I think if you ask any communicators, they've been standing on the tops of their desk yelling for years, we need to think about this. We need to do more than what we do about this. And if I could there's a couple, piece of advice that I would give to your audience. One would be, if you have a communications team, put the leader on the ELT. If you don't have a communications team, get one, because their sole job is to pay attention and to protect the asset that makes up 1/3 of your value. It is really that simple for the comm side. And to them, they're ready to communicate. But man, their life gets a whole lot easier, and they can focus on the things that matter, like growing your business, building trust with your stakeholders, if they're not having to be handed a garbage can that's on fire and saying, figure out how to fix this. If they have a team behind them that can give them early warning, if they have a leadership that is fixing problems before they become a crisis, that makes protecting their reputation all that much easier. And quite honestly, if you do the job right, if you do the preparation right, very few people knows it happened. And I'll give you an example of that. So one of our clients is a government contractor, and as most government contractors, a good portion of their employee bases are veterans. So the Thursday before the Friday of Veterans Day weekend, they get a call from their payroll provider saying, we've had a glitch your paychecks aren't arriving. So not only were their people not going to get paid, the large majority of their employee base that were veterans were not going to get paid until Wednesday because it was a long weekend on Veterans Day weekend. So how do we honor you? We don't pay you. That's not a great message, and that doesn't help employees. It doesn't build reputation. It doesn't do any of those things. But they had done the work. They knew their values, so there was no question that they were going to pay their people. No matter what happened, they were going to pay their people. They were not going to let their people suffer. They knew their stakeholders. Their number one stakeholders were their employees. Like a lot of government contractors, who you put in a seat is just really important. So their employees were very important. And they knew that they had to get them at a certain time on the Friday, or else nobody would know what was happening. So they knew they were going to pay them. They knew the messaging. They knew who had to sign off on these plans. The CFO had a fund for just these sorts of things. So they sent out a message to I think they had 3,500 employees at the time. And they said, okay, we're really sorry. You're not getting paid. But if you can't make it till Wednesday, because it was, Veterans Day is the 11th. Some things hit in the middle of the month. You're counting on that paycheck. And if you can't make it, here's a 1-800 number. Call us and we'll figure it out. Out of that 3,500, 12 people called. 12 people. And they figured it out, right? They figured out how to get them through to when they were paid. But now here's the real proof is in the pudding. 2 months later, they did an employee survey. Employee satisfaction had gone up by 10%. Employee loyalty, employee retention, employees' pride of working there had gone up 20%. So not only did they not have a crisis, which let's just be really clear, if you can't pay your people on Veterans Day weekend, that is a reputational hit. So they turned what could have been a real problem into a positive, something that carries on into the marketplace. And so that is the real advantage of doing the preparation, is they didn't have to ask these questions. They didn't delay. They didn't, they caught all these people before they opened their bank accounts and saw they didn't get paid. The preparation paid off for them. And I think that for a lot of people, that preparation can pay off, because if you were in a crisis, if you were in that type of situation where you were about, if you getting paid for your work, that's a trust by your employee. Your employee trusts that you are going to pay them. You can't pay them, that's breaking the trust. And the other part of this, if you build the trust with these audiences, with your stakeholders, when something does go wrong, they're going to give you the benefit of the doubt. So even if the satisfaction hadn't got up, it wouldn't have gone down, because they'd built this trust, they'd built this understanding, and their stakeholders knew that they would make it right. So they were forgiving. They would be forgiving of that. And that's what the goal is. Because if someone doesn't trust you, they're not going to work for you, they're not going to buy from you, they're not going to do business with you.
Do you find that it's a big roadblock when you work with clients, when you first start working with them, that they don't quite understand that reputation, even though it's not a line item, is actually a really significant part of the balance sheet? Do executives, do boards get this, or is this kind of a roadblock you have towards working with them to start doing this kind of reputation? And how do you get through those roadblocks?
It is absolutely. And it's not even when we start working with them, it's to get them to talk to us. There are very few organizations in this business ecosystem that are A+ crisis ready organizations. The difference between those we work with and those we don't is exactly what you just said. Do they believe that a reputation is valuable? Do they believe that preventing problems is better than responding to problems? It is a mindset shift for a lot of these people. And that's a differentiator. And honestly, I think it's a differentiator not between how they interact with us, but mature leadership versus just leadership. Mature leadership is saying, I know what my business is, I know who our stakeholders are, and I know what I have to do to make us successful. And part of that is protecting your infrastructure, protecting your license to operate. It's another way of talking about this trust of reputation. That's a license to operate. And the mature leaders understand that that's the key to making any business work is your license to operate. Those that are just, I'm a leader, do what I say, I know best, they're going to be the ones calling us at 3 a.m. and saying, such and such has happened. How do I fix it? And that's, let me just put it this way, that price tag is a heck of a lot bigger than the one to prepare.
Yeah. Fixing a reputation is always harder than building one, right?
Well, what is it that I'm not good at quoting people, but Warren Buffett said it takes 25 years to build one and 5 minutes to lose it.
Something like that. And I believe that is Warren Buffett. One of the things we talk a lot about on this show with our guests is the skill of managing up. It's really important for emerging leaders, middle managers to learn managing up as a not just a valuable and essential skill for doing your job as a leader.
Yeah.
It's indispensable. What are your best tips? Because I know you have to do a lot of this with your clients. What are your best tips to our audience for managing up?
Well, honestly, this is something that I learned earlier in my career with politicians. There's a moment when I had to lick my hand and smooth my senator's hair that it just, you kind of step back and you say, did I just do that? Uh, but a lot of it is, I think for me, managing up is the skill that I learned first and best, because you have to manage these very large personalities with very high pressure situations. And most of them are incredibly intelligent. I've met a few not so intelligent ones. But for the most part, they're very intelligent. And it takes some, you've got to figure out, for me, the key was to match their way they went into the world, figuring out if they needed tough love, if they needed a partner, a thinking partner, or if they needed somebody to be able to figure out that just sometimes they just needed to, be heard and just listen. My managing up philosophy has always been figure out who they are to figure out how to manage them. I had my very first boss, real boss, was a giant of a man. He was 6'4", 300 pounds, like just a giant of a man. And he wanted people that would challenge him and spar with him. And I can't recount the story on your podcast because it's profanity laden.
I
But
mean, I don't mind, but we'll just click
well,
the explicit box when we upload it. But
the first time that it was the first meeting we had, and I kind of knew him a little bit, and I'd really gotten my head handed to me as part of an election campaign. I was 24 years old, and I'd gotten my head handed to me, and it was pretty rough. So I went to Ottawa, where my party was in power, and this guy sat down and he goes, "Pat likes you, so I like you. Do you want a job?" Pat was his chief of staff. I said, "Sure." I don't have one, so sure. This was a Thursday. I started on a Monday, and he was a very early adopter of technology. And so we were doing a video conference between Ottawa and the district. And this woman, Pat was a socialite who had gone into politics. Very, very brilliant woman, but very, very proper. And so we're sitting there at this video conference, and 6'4", 300-pound Reg looks at me and goes, "Get me some fucking coffee." And I looked at him and I said, "Get your own fucking coffee." And Pat looks at me. Pat starts laughing, and Reg goes, "Oh, Pat, you were so right. She's perfect for the job." But then my next job, I worked for a fantastic woman named Sharon Carstairs. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant woman. Sharon is one of the most refined, just refined, put together, brilliant, wonderful people, and she expects you to operate the same way. So there was none of that cursing in the world. And so that's what I mean when I say you've got to figure out who you were managing when you were managing up, and figure out the key to getting what you need done based on who they are.
Yeah, whether you're managing up, down, sideways, diagonally, pick a direction, it's all about knowing people, right?
Yep.
Now, you've already talked about working with clients who kind of don't buy into the preparation, and they don't really come to you for help until they're in the middle of a crisis. So for our folks who are watching and listening, when they're in crisis mode, when a crisis happens to them, before they call you, what's the very first move they need to make to stop the bleeding?
I'm going to say the first one is not to speak. People will tell you to talk fast, to make sure that you get your message out fast, but you better know all the facts. That's the number one thing that I would say. Call us as soon as you smell smoke. Most people don't. Make sure you have the facts. Because if you go out and you tell people something wrong, they're going to remember that more than that you were out fast. It has to be, you have to know the facts. So we also have, I think about things in basically a crisis pyramid. And so it's like life and limb, risk and safety, trust and reputation, and then, happiness and at the very top. So you have to look at it this way. If your crisis is life and limb, remember Tylenol from the 80s. I think both of us were probably pretty little when that happened. But their number one priority for Tylenol was to get out to the American people and say, this is going to hurt us, but you can't buy our product. It may be contaminated. And that's considered the gold standard of crisis response, which I guess was very revolutionary for the day. But if you're sitting in Tylenol and saying, "Oh gosh, people could die from our product," the number one priority is to get out the information that is going to make people not die.
Yeah, I just saw a documentary on that a couple of weeks ago because I was very young. I was maybe 10 years old when that was happening. And all I knew is something was wrong with Tylenol. It wasn't like I was using Tylenol. So at 10 years old, but I think it's still the gold standard today. We understand, because not only was don't use our product, it was give it all back to us. It was one of the first major product recalls that this country ever saw.
Right.
And it was every bottle everywhere. It was not these lots, not if you bought it here. It was every bottle everywhere.
Yeah.
And they still get praise today for how they handled that. And I think they showed a lot of leadership there, because it seems that a lack of leadership is what often gets these companies into trouble in these situations. Mm-hmm. And I'm a big believer in we get the leaders we train and develop, right? So what are some of the gaps in leadership and leadership training that land companies in hot water?
number one is not having good leadership, not understanding what your values are. Because there are a lot of that Tylenol response was based in humanity. If you think about that, it was, these are our friends, these are our neighbors, these are our family. We have to protect one another. And I think that is what a great failure of leadership is to not understand how you fit into the world and what your responsibility is to the world, to your stakeholders, and thinking you can do it all by yourself. And I think the biggest one, quite frankly, is that you're infallible. Most leaders are taught that to be a good leader, you have to be infallible. You cannot make mistakes. You are the knower of everything. You know this. I know this. Crisis happens. As much as you wish that it doesn't, as much as you think you are a titan of the world and it's not going to happen to you, it will happen to you. And that to me is the fatal flaw, is the infallibility, the I am perfect and it is never going to happen to us.
Yeah, I saw it all through the Air Force. I still see it today. I don't know where it comes from, but I know it's out there. It's this idea that once you become a leader, you can't make mistakes anymore. But the people we hold up as our best leaders are the ones who, when a crisis happens or a mistake is made, they're the ones who recognize it, admit it, accept it, and fix it.
Yeah.
So it's, if I could figure that out, why we all head down that road of believing we need to be infallible. I'd be making a ton more money if I could figure out how to solve that problem. But let's take a little bit of a break from the serious questions. Let's play a game. Are you up for a game?
Of course.
All right. This game is called Rapid Response.
Okay.
I'm going to ask you a series of questions. I want you to tell me the first thing that comes to your mind.
Uh-oh. Okay.
Doesn't need to be a one-word answer. Go ahead and elaborate. Tell us what you need to tell us. But we're just looking for your initial response to the question, okay?
Absolutely.
All right. Stephanie Craig, rapid response round. Your time starts now. Podcast recommendation.
Criminal.
One question we should ask ourselves to help avoid a crisis.
Am I doing the right thing whenever you're making a decision?
Someone underrated we should all be paying attention to.
Oh my gosh. I am trying someone underrated. Governor of New Mexico.
Oh, that's actually a very good one. I live in Las Vegas. We get a lot of New Mexico news in our local paper here, so we hear a lot about what's going on in New Mexico. And there's a lot of there's a lot of stuff happening down there. There's a lot of interesting things going on. So check out New Mexico. Mm-hmm. Okay, don't answer right away on this one. You get a choice. What's your go-to song to get pumped up, or your walk-on music?
I think it's the same song, High Hopes, Panic at the Disco.
Ah, great one. Biggest influence in your life?
My dad and my grandpa.
A book everyone should read?
Anything fiction.
Yeah, I think reading fiction, especially in the business world and the entrepreneurial world, we're all talking about the books we're reading, and it's always somebody's biography or somebody's memoir or the latest, productivity book. And those are all great. I love those. I read a lot of those, but it's important to take a little bit of a break and recharge yourself and let fiction give you some ideas and enhance your creativity a little bit, I think.
Well, the two reasons that I read fiction, one is that it creates new synapses in your brain because you have to picture what's happening. You don't know what the person looks like. You don't know what the scene looks like. You have to picture it. So it creates actually new brain synapses. But the other reason is it stops me from dreaming about the things that keep me in stress mode during the day. It is the break between my day and my sleep. Is I read a lot of historical mysteries, um, and the reason is because I don't want to be thinking about what's going on now. I want to think about what happened then, or have new ideas kind of sprung into my life, or things that I keep a list by my bed, not the things I have to do, but the things I want to research. That's why I
Uh,
read fiction.
I wholeheartedly agree. Best winter recreational activity.
Used to be figure skating because I figure skated for most of my young life, but now I would just say hockey or skating. I think ice skating in America is highly underrated.
Yeah, it doesn't get the attention some of our other sports get here until it's an Olympic year, and then everybody wants to watch it. But
Or curling, which you can do at any age.
my mom loves curling. I don't quite get it, but my mom loves it. So
Give it a shot.
your dream vacation spot.
Easter Island.
Oh, good one. An industry trend flying under the radar.
The boring sides of AI. And by that I mean, one of the things that we counsel people is that the way AI is changing the crisis business is that you can't just put out a statement and put it in one place. Because misinformation, if somebody puts misinformation on Reddit and it's upvoted 50, 100, 200 times, that's what AI is going to learn. I think the boring sides of AI need to be talked about more, both positive and negative.
I couldn't agree more. The boring sides of any technology are what we need to be talking about, not the sexy stuff.
Yeah.
All right, last one. Your favorite sports team or player?
Georgia Bulldogs, hands down.
Interesting choice for someone from Canada.
But I did part of my undergrad at the University of Georgia. And my sorority sister said to me, you will either love it or you will hate it. And I have loved it for a lot longer than I'm going to admit.
I back in the old days, I dated a girl. She didn't go to Georgia. She went to North Carolina, but both of her sisters went to Georgia, and they were full on Georgia fans. They really, it's like Las Vegas, right? You either love it or you hate it, right? So, and they fully loved it. So, well,
And
thanks for playing our game.
oh,
You're
it's
a good
so much fun.
sport. We learned a ton about you. To get back to it, we talked a little bit earlier about in the military, we do a lot of wargaming exercises, and we do things like red teaming to help prepare us for crises that may be coming our way in the future. What tools do you use with your clients to get them ready, to get them prepared, like we talked about?
A lot of very similar things. We do workshops and simulations with a lot of our clients, which we think are important once or twice a year, like war games, once, twice a year, right? We also think that a constant thinking about what could come at you is important. So we used to say, hold up at your industry publication at your staff meeting every Monday and ask what we would do if you saw the front page story. We've kind of, as a little service, so kith is the kith of kith and kin. We like to create community. That's a huge part of who we are as a firm. So we've actually started something that is free, that will always be free, and it's called Crisis of the Month. And so people can sign up for it. And basically, what we do is we take a story that we find interesting and we'll detail it, we'll detail the problems, and then we'll just ask 4 questions. And if people want, we have resources, but people take it into their staff meetings on Monday or Tuesday or whenever you're doing your staff meeting, and they will ask the question, what would we do? Here's the scenario. What would we do if this happened? And those are this has to be ongoing. You can't just wake up one day, pull the crisis plan off the shelf, dust it off and think everyone's going to know what they need to do. It has to be an ongoing thing. So responses, as with wargaming, as with the training you do in the military, your response, what you need to do in that moment, has to be innate. You can't think about it. You have to know what to do, and that only comes from constant training. But you can't do a great big simulation with every month. You need to do those once or twice a year. Every week you can be asking, well, what would we do if this happened to us? It's a really simple way to do it. And all you have to do is hold up your phone. If you're old school like me, hold up the newspaper.
Yeah, it really is the little things that matter. And in the military, we, especially in the flying world, we bring those in by having like emergency procedure of the day or threat of the week or things like that. Or when you're in the airplane, when your instructor says to you, okay, I'm going to pull your throttle back. What would you do right now if your engine went out right now? Right.
Yeah.
It's something we've internalized so well in the military that we almost don't talk about it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We just do it because and that gets us in the mindset of what if.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, one of the things that is hard for veterans to transition out is because we're always like, what if? We're always kind of looking at the world a little bit differently than everybody else. So now
Well,
I understand you're not allowed to build scenarios anymore with your clients. What's
okay.
up with that?
Well, I had a series of clients where I built the scenario, and in the middle of the simulation, they happened, which is not a good place to be. We were doing a global simulation with a mining company that had a outpost in New Zealand, and one of the scenarios was, what do you do if there's an earthquake? And we had to suspend the simulation because there was an earthquake. Another one was we were doing a global simulation with a financial company, and it was dealing with geopolitical risk. And we actually had Russia invading Poland, but one of the guys had to get off the Zoom because Russia had invaded the Ukraine. And so we've determined I am no longer allowed to create the scenarios for fear that I'm going to create another thing that comes true while we're doing it. So we have a team that does it. I don't do it anymore.
I mean, alternate suggestion, create some scenarios where some good stuff happens.
True fact, right?
Yeah. You know, like
What would
inflation drops down to 1.8%.
Okay. Well, let me ask you a question. If I could design the best scenario for you, what would it be?
The best scenario for me, I'm not used to answering questions on my
I
own
figured.
podcast. Best scenario for me, I don't know. I'm gonna have to take that one as homework.
Okay, please do. I think
So
mine would be cotton candy on every corner, I think. I love cotton candy.
I don't know. That wouldn't be good for me because I don't like cotton candy, and even if I did, I think that'd be too much cotton candy.
Well, I just want
But
it when
that's
I want it.
that's kind of the thing with like there is such too much of a good thing. That's why
True.
I'm a little reluctant to answer that question. Right? It's my wallet's not big enough to hold all my $1,000 bills. Would be great, but
You need to
but
buy a new wallet.
yeah. So
Well, that's part of what we talk about as well. When you were talking about that, always spotting what's next, that's something we talk about as well. What's the unintended consequence? What's the ripple effect that happens to the decision you make? So, if there's cotton candy on every corner, I get a lot of cavities, and my dentist is very, very happy. But my dental insurance goes up. So, what are like you were saying, what are the things that could happen from the decisions you make?
yeah, unintended consequences. And we talked a little about managing up as an indispensable leadership skill.
Mhm.
This is another one. Is being able to ask yourself what if, and Stephanie's given us some really great things we can do like every day or every week to try to develop that what if muscle in our brain and really think through those unintended consequences of just to prepare us for not even crisis decision making but regular decision making. So
Absolutely.
another great leadership skill for you all to work on. Now we talked about a lot of what goes on in crisis management, it comes down to leadership development, leadership training within companies, and where we don't necessarily have teams that are prepared for it. What are some other traits and skills employers should be developing in their future leaders to help them, again, manage not just in crisis and protect the reputation of the organization, but just in regular day-to-day decision making?
I think the number one thing people can do is make sure that their policies, their values are consistent throughout their organization. We worked with a great company in the lumber industry, family owned, that they teach their values from day one. They look for people that share those values when they're hiring because they put those values in their job postings. And I think that's what makes them such a great company, is that they know who they are. They have found people that believe in those same things. And it's when I say, I think there's nowadays saying you believe in something's kind of a loaded question. But for them, it's very much, community. Do you believe in community? Do you believe in accountability? Things that you really want to search for, and they have it from the top, and they do it all the way to their recruitment. So before someone gets there, they know what you stand for, and that North Star. We talk about values so often because it is your North Star on how you operate. And if people, that would be my number one recommendation for if you're looking for a way to impart these ideas and to search for the people that are going to be beneficial to a good crisis, a culture of crisis readiness. And that is to look for people that share your values, but also be very clear on your values as a company and operate under those values. Because if you say, for instance, your value is we value diversity, there better be diversity in your board, your leadership, your supply chain, your recruitment, your sponsorships. Whatever value you take, it should permeate your entire organization.
Yeah, I had a really great mentor. My last assignment in the Air Force was as online instructor at Air War College, and I had a great mentor there. Shout out to Colonel Ed Redmond, former B-2 pilot, and he always said he was like the conscience of our little department at Air War College, making sure that we were living to our values. And he always said, values can't just be a poster you put up on the wall.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, you told us a few stories about your days working in politics. What are some of the other lessons you've learned about leadership from the world of politics?
That I think one of the ones would be that some of the best leaders are the quietest. They're the most thoughtful. Um, the values really permeates that as well. Um, you want to live with, you want to live with, it kind of comes down to living with them sometimes. You spend so much time with them. But you want to work with people that you can believe in because the hours are long. You don't get paid a lot. The stress is high. You want to make sure that you're working with people you can believe in. Um, I think the other thing that folks don't take into consideration when it really comes to politics is that this is public service, and you have to remember who you are serving. And if you are working for somebody that doesn't share that idea that you're there to serve, and that is not a partisan issue at all. People, by and large, in Congress are there to serve the people that elected them. In local government, very much the same thing. In state government, very much the same thing. Um, the folks that I've always worked for have always been good people, and that's the thing you have to look for when you're working for somebody, is make sure they're a good person, because it makes your job very hard if they are not a good person.
Yeah, it's definitely challenging. I have some experiences from the military as well, and it's at all levels and all places in public service. So, so what's the most unexpected lesson you've learned about leadership from being a military spouse, and how has it shaped your approach to crisis management?
Um, I think that there's the thing that I have seen most, that quite honestly my husband really has it, that I would love to steal, is a really good, he's a scary good judge of people. And I think that folks that are hiring within the military are very good judges of people and skill. And by judges of people, I don't mean it along the like, oh, he's a bad seed. I mean it in a, this skill set's going to fit really well into this team. That team building idea, I think, is something I very much admire and try to pull into my own world. Um, and the thing that I found really interesting about crisis management and what I do versus what he did was how much it's similar, how much the philosophies are similar, and how much there is things that we preach in the corporate world are already being done in the military. Like you were saying, like the what if, we're having to tell people to do that, but it's inherent in the military structure. And I think that there's a lot of lessons to be learned. Um, One of the people that I listen to on a regular basis is General McChrystal, because he kind of lives in this space. He doesn't really live in this space, but he does sometimes. Um, and I could be, it's because I hear and I'm reaffirmed a lot of the things that I think. And I have a guy that's done some pretty cool things to reaffirm them for me.
Yeah, John McChrystal is not only a great leader, also really good at communicating, like analyzing how to be a good leader and
Mm-hmm.
communicating it to people. He makes it very very clear. It's very well done. It's one of the great things about being in the military, about being a veteran. I've worked with folks, and I remember one person saying, "I love working with veterans because it's like having cheat codes to get through life."
Mm-hmm. Well,
So
and that's, I think, what um, you know, there's so many people that you meet, my husband included, that the military changed his life. And be in joining, and don't hold this against him, he enlisted in the Navy, went to college, and the Air Force stole him away. So he ended up having a very long and loved career in the Air Force, but it changed his trajectory in life, changed how he thinks about the world. And I think that that is a very, I found it very interesting that, you'll find somebody that is in the military and they're a mechanic, and someone says, okay, well, they come to the civilian world and they can be a mechanic. The skills are not transferable. What you've done as a mechanic in the military is so much more robust, and there's management and there's supply chain management, and there's all these skills that are very transferable, not just as a mechanic. And I think that disconnect is something that I find really challenging to, um I'm trying to think of the word for it. It's challenging for me to be patient with, because all it would take is an understanding of what is happening and the skills that are learned from basic training all the way through to whenever you decide to separate.
it's one of the biggest challenges we have with veterans when they transition out of the military, especially the young folks, but even with the folks who've been in 15, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And I think I have an explanation for it because I work with this charity called Vets in Tech. And our whole thing is we're trying to get military veterans, military spouses, dependents, the military community, we're trying to help them transition into tech careers, whether that's Silicon Valley kind of tech or more traditional, less traditional kinds of tech. One of the It wasn't until I started getting involved with Vets in Tech that I realized this. When you are in the military, chances are 99% of the time, all you have done since you were 17 years old is wear a military uniform.
Mhm.
You don't know what goes on the outside. You don't know what skills are valuable on the outside. You don't understand that you have this whole skill set that a lot of people would pay a lot of money for, even though you don't meet the job description criteria on paper. We think of ourselves as mechanics or pilots or infantry guys or girls or whatever it is, right? We think about, we get locked into, this is what I did in the military. And that's the hardest thing we have, is to start to get people transitioning out of the military to think about, you have a skill set that's so much broader, but no one tells them that, because no one has been on the outside to tell them you have a skill set that's broader. So that's one of the things we're trying to do with Vets in Tech, is build good relationships with commanders, first shirts, chiefs, all the equivalents in all the services on bases and who are still on active duty, to be a resource to help show them. Because I know when I was a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force, when I left, if a kid had come to me and said, I want a career in tech, what should I do? I would have gone, I don't know.
Right.
I know wearing a blue suit. You know,
Yep.
I can probably get you a government contractor job, but that's about the best I can do for you. You just don't know. When you've been inside something your whole life, you don't really understand how it applies on the outside. And so that's my working theory on the explanation for that. And with Vets in Tech, we're trying to help people break out of that, and we're trying to build the relationship with the military to help commanders and chiefs and first shirts and that kind of thing think about, give them the knowledge of, this is what we really need on the outside.
Well, and I think that that's really, you kind of hit it on the head there. Which, when you are transitioning out, the people that shouldn't be advising you shouldn't be the people that are still in. It
They
should
just
be
don't know.
right. It should be the people that were on the outside, but also get the inside and help create those synopses. There was this. I used to be the head of external for a tech trade association, and there was this wonderful man, and I don't even know if he's still working for them. His name is John Stevenson, and he was at SAP, veteran himself. And we were meeting with somebody in the labor department that was dealing with veterans hiring, and they were talking about, you know, we go to these job fairs, we go to these jobs fairs, and John was just saying, we recruit by the thousands. We have we have electronic recruitment. How do we get the hundreds and thousands of people that we know that I know? He actually said, that I know are very qualified to do the jobs we have in our company, but their skill set, their ABCD qualifications, they may sound like they're ABCD in our recruitment, but they're not. They're DE and F. And that DE and F is 2-3 pay grades or a totally different job. And the poor man was very forward thinking and very frustrated at the end of the meeting, because he was like, this is a real problem. I know that if you are I'm going to say, garbage collector in the Army, that it means that you are also doing this, 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 and this. So I'm not going to recommend you for sanitation in a building because you've got some extra skills than sanitation. But somebody sitting in HR in a corporation is not going to understand that being sanitation in the Army is different than being sanitation at company ABC. And it was interesting to see his frustration, because they weren't marrying the two things in a way that made sense, and nobody was helping anybody that way.
And that's because nobody knew that they needed help.
Right, right. And so I don't. Speaking of, I should find out what happened to him, because he was a very smart man. But it was it was a problem then, and this was a few years ago. And by the sounds of what we're talking about, it hasn't changed that much.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and we're working on it. And that's the best thing, is we're working on it. So,
and if there's any way I can be helpful, I spent a lot of years in the tech industry, Jason. I'd love to be helpful to this.
we should definitely have another conversation, and I will get you introduced to some of the national leadership at Vets in Tech, because I think where you are both in your job position and where you are geographically is a huge help to Vets in Tech.
Would love it.
All right, good. We made a deal. Let's talk about failures, though.
Okay.
What's the one mistake that turned out to be your biggest breakthrough?
This is a bit of a long story, so buckle up.
I got nothing but time.
So I graduated. So as I said, I did part of my undergrad at the University of Georgia. I did the rest of it at the University of North Dakota. And I graduated by one of my sorority sisters shaking my foot at a when we had been evacuated, saying, "Hey, Steph, wake up! Grand Forks is flooded. University is canceled, and welcome. You just graduated." And so I went back to Grand Forks, North Dakota, and it was flooded. It was flooded. It was on fire. It was awful. Some of the most resilient people I've ever met, by the way, is in Grand Forks, North Dakota. But they absolutely, I'm trying to think of the word I'm looking for. They are resolute. They were resolute in their getting out the newspaper. So a friend of mine, we were in the student union, and he looks at me and he says, "Hey, Steph, the Grand Forks Herald needs writers, and I am going to write for them. You should come write with me." I was dirty from head to toe. I do not enjoy being dirty, so I went home to Canada. And the Grand Forks Herald went on to win a Pulitzer Prize. So my friend Mark, who asked me to go with him, had won part of a Pulitzer Prize. Meanwhile, I had gone home, and that just so happened the Red River flowed north, still flows north, actually, flows north, and it just kept flooding the whole way, flooding the whole way. And I had no clothes. I didn't really know if I'd graduate because all my clothes were locked in my sorority house, which was flooded. And my mom just looked at me after 48 hours and said, "You're driving me nuts. There's a federal election. Figure out which party you belong to and go." And so there I went. And, like any young, not sure if she graduated, flood evacuee, I started knocking doors for a candidate. And gosh, people were angry. They couldn't believe they'd call in Canada, they call elections kind of when they want. There's no fixed election day. And they couldn't believe that we called an election in the middle of a flood. And I just said, I was like, "Oh, I understand. Like, I used to live in Grand Forks, North Dakota." And so they're watching on their TV as Grand Forks is not only flooded, but the downtown is burning down to the top of the water line. And I just remember um, going back, and I was sitting there eating my very sketchy ham and cheese sandwich, waiting to go back out and knock more doors. And someone came to me and said, "Hey, Steph, why are people calling here and offering you clothes?" And I said, "Well, like, they were mad at me, and I just told them I understood why they were mad, and then they felt really bad." And Greg was like, "Oh, you're so doing the wrong job." And it didn't it, I think giving up on the city of Grand Forks and needing to go home to me is a failure. And I was dead set on being a journalist. But this moment, this change in circumstance set me on a new path, which was politics. And I could never have imagined the wonderful life that I've been able to have because of this very fateful decision. Turns out that the man, Mark, who had asked me to go work on the paper, him and I met again in Washington. He had gone on to be the George W. Bush um, strategic national security advisor for strategic communications. And I was on Capitol Hill, and we met again. And I think the thing for that I learned from this, and I think my stepdaughter was graduating from high school a year and a half ago, so everyone was talking about these COVID kids that didn't have that finality. They missed so much, and it really made me think back. I didn't have a graduation ceremony. I didn't get to do all the things you do when you graduate college, but you have to make the best of what you're given. And that it's not really failure to me, but it's dislodged plans. So everyone has this plan of how it's supposed to go. And I think that's the biggest lesson to me, is that you have to figure out with what you're given what you're going to do, because there's always obstacles. How are you going to adjust? How are you going to see around the obstacle if your goal has not changed, if your dream has not changed? How are you getting around the obstacle? Or did the obstacle change what you want? I wanted a Pulitzer Prize myself, but on my own. I could never have even imagined being on a presidential campaign stage in Phoenix, Arizona, watching one of the major party leaders give a speech while I was working. Like, that was beyond my wildest dream. And if you'd asked me when I was 22 if, that was even a possibility, or that was the dream I wanted, I would have told you no. I want to go to some war zone and be a foreign correspondent. Absolutely not. I never expected this, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Well, I think that's an amazing place to leave it for today. This has been amazing. Where can everyone find you so they can thank you for joining us today?
Well, this is most definitely my pleasure. So, if folks want to drop me an email, my email is S as in Stephanie, Craig, Craig, at kith, KITH.co. There is no M. That part's very important. Or on LinkedIn. I'm Stephanie Craig, and I have a picture that I like to call is a approachable ninja. And so it's just find me on there. I love to talk to people. I love to meet new people. One of my favorite things in the world is to meet new people. So please reach out.
Yeah, we have our audience is a lot of folks in the tech community, so .co will sound perfectly normal to them, but for everyone else, it is .co, not .com. We'll have that all in the show notes for you guys to find, and you won't have to worry about it anyway. So, Stephanie, I personally want to thank you for being on the show today. To everyone watching, if you found this conversation valuable, go ahead and share it, leave a comment. Don't forget to subscribe. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or some podcast player where you can leave a review and you really liked what we did here today, please leave us a 5-star review. It really helps us get the word out, get the message out, get the podcast in front of more folks so we can share all these amazing conversations we're having. We've got a lot more amazing leaders coming your way. Go out there, do great things today. Keep watching, keep developing your leader's mindset. Onward and upward.